Hello and welcome. Our top focus today remains on the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the conflict is intensifying with the M23 rebels backed by the neighbouring Rwanda, who have tightened their grip on the DRC's mineral-rich eastern region. Intense clashes continued throughout the past 24 hours, taking the death toll to over 100 and injuring around 1,000. The rebels have now seized the airport of Goma, the DRC's largest city in the east. This has forced the closure of the local airspace. Domestic flights have also reportedly been halted. The Goma airport serves as a vital hub, providing humanitarian access and means for evacuation. It is also a key point for regional connectivity and trade. Its capture is a major blow to the Congolese army that is fighting the M23 rebels. The rebels have claimed to capture the entire Goma city, but the DRC still says that the city has not fallen as the fighting continues. However, many videos show only M23 fighters and Rwandan forces marching on the city's streets. In fact, more than 1,200 Congolese soldiers have reportedly surrendered to the Rwandan forces. Several soldiers have fled and sought refuge in Rwanda. Videos show them sitting in rows on the floor of a cultural center where they were held by the Rwandan army. Rwandan soldiers were seen providing medical examinations to the surrendered troops. Meanwhile, the crisis has also forced many civilians to flee to Rwanda, as clashes and gunfire continued throughout the past 24 hours. Now, many bodies have been seen scattered in the streets of Goma, and there has been an increase in reports of sexual violence, rape and looting. Hospitals have been overwhelmed as casualties grow. The aid coming to the region has been blocked as the borders, ports and roads are shut. Several truck drivers carrying aid were trapped at the border.
We saw and heard terrible things. Dead bodies, gunshots, bombs, things we have never experienced in our country. We thank God we have made it out.
Meanwhile, anger is growing among the people of DRC against the M23 rebels and Rwanda. In the capital, Kinshasa, protesters targeted several embassies of countries they accuse of complicity in Rwanda's support of the M23 rebels. The missions of France, Belgium, the United States, Kenya, Uganda, South Africa and Rwanda were among those attacked and set ablaze. The police fired tear gas at protesters who attacked diplomatic buildings in the capital.
What Rwanda is doing is in collusion with France, Belgium, the United States of America, and others. Congolese people are tired. How many times do we have to die, and for how many days?
Now, the president of the DRC, Felix Tshisekedi, has refused to attend a crisis summit with the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame. That was supposed to be chaired by the Kenyan president, William Ruto. Both sides are accusing each other of supporting opposing ethnic militias. The DRC alleges Rwanda's support ethnic Tutsi-led M23 rebel group, while Kigali accuses Kinshasa of supporting the Hutu militia. The Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, or the FDLR. However, Rwanda is accused of using the M23 rebels to loot the DRC's minerals in the North Kivu province, of which Goma is the capital. Now, Kigali is facing intense international pressure to withdraw its support to the M23 rebels, including from nations such as the US and China. Will the African neighbours work to resolve the crisis? Now, for more on this, we have with us Bram Verlest, a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies Africa. He is joining us live from Liège in Belgium. Thank you for being with us.
You're welcome.
Now, the M23 rebels have taken control of Goma's airport, making a major escalation in this conflict. What are the strategic and the political implications of this seizure for both the Congolese government and the regional stability?
Well, first of all, the M23 control goes beyond the Goma airport, as you mentioned, but they also reported now taking control of the city itself, or at least most of the city. I think the most immediate implications of these advances towards Goma and its entering of the city, which is the provincial capital of North Kivu, with a large population, including many displaced, are humanitarian. So the most recent estimates, around 700,000 internally displaced people are based in and around Goma. Between 40 and 50,000 have arrived in the city in the last weeks. And so fighting and the M23 control disrupts severely this much needed humanitarian access, as the airport is indeed closed and most roads to Goma
Yeah.
are cut off. In addition to that, the fighting has also interrupted essential services as water, electricity supply, internet, which also increases humanitarian needs and affects the humanitarian response. Within the conflict, this is indeed a major escalation, and
Right.
most observers were of the opinion that neither M23 or its backers had a real interest in taking Goma, as it took Goma briefly during the previous iteration of the movement in 2012. And when they did, this also marked the beginning of the end for the movement, and it led to increased international pressure on Rwanda, as well as internal divergences within the movement. It is worth stressing that M23 has researched for over 3 years now without taking Goma or attempting to. And during the first iteration in 2012, it only took 7 months for the movement to approach to Goma. I think there are several dimensions to these events, but a relevant background is a deadlock in the
Yeah.
Luanda process, which is an Angolan-led mediation process aimed at de-escalating tensions between the DRC and Rwanda. And since December, talks had stalled after President Kagame did not show up to a presidential meeting because of a Congolese refusal to engage in a dialogue with M23 in the framework of this Luanda process. And since then, we have seen a
Right.
progressive deterioration of the security situation on the terrain. The M23 has advanced and taken other towns as Masisi, Minova, Sake, and now Goma. And latest reports of today indicate that
Right.
M23 is further progressing southwards towards Bukavu. And there are a lot of Burundian soldiers present in this area because Burundi has deployed bilaterally in support of Kinshasa against M23. And so these developments are likely to lead to a further regional escalation. And these regional geopolitics are important to understand the current situation. M23 has been pushing for a dialogue
Right.
with Kinshasa. I would say that there is still uncertainty if this push to Goma was motivated to force Kinshasa to a concession and to the table with the M23 rebellion, or in a worst case scenario, a complete step away from the diplomatic process. As what we're seeing now is as with previous phases of
Right.
escalation, yes.
The protesters have targeted embassies in Kinshasa. This, of course, signaling growing public anger. What is driving this frustration, and how might it impact diplomatic relations between the DRC and its neighbors, particularly Rwanda and Uganda, which have both been accused of backing the M23?
Well, as your interviews mentioned, this seems to be first of all the result of a public anger with the international community's passivity and even perceived complicity with the Rwandan support to M23 and the Rwandan presence in the DRC. And so, from this perspective, the targeting of the embassies, at least in part, resulted from this public and also politically fed perception that M23 crisis is part of a broader foreign current conspiracy aimed at taking control of Congo and its resources. I think the event itself, on its own, will not necessarily lead to a worsening of diplomatic relations, as the Congolese government did not instigate these attacks, and I also condemned them. But it's also relevant to point out that such protests have occurred in recent years before. Some of them have also directed the UN peacekeeping mission MONUSCO, so they are not new. I would also add that these actions rather reflect the already worsened and complicated diplomatic relations between the DRC and several countries, in particularly Rwanda, but also
Right.
Kenya and Uganda.
Yeah.
And so, of course, M23 receives this Rwandan
Right.
support, and Kinshasa perceives M23 as not more than a front for mainly Rwandan interests. But it also has become increasingly frustrated with Kenya's and Uganda's position on the conflict, ranging from frustration with this passivity of the countries or this kind of political support to M23, to even suspicions that the countries might be actually supporting the movement. And so, in a way, these attacks of these
Right.
embassies in Kinshasa have to be seen in light of this, and not necessarily a kind of new escalation. It's rather a reflection of already existing regional tensions over this conflict.
Right, and with over 100 people killed in the clashes, what role can international actors play in de-escalating the violence? And are there, in your view, any prospects for a ceasefire or diplomatic resolution in the near future?
I think first, the international and regional responses should prioritize the humanitarian situation and the question of this humanitarian access, because this is really urgent. And so this is what most international response has to go through now urgently. But secondly, there have been a variety of regional responses to this conflict, both militarily. We have a SADC mission, SAMI DRC present. We had the East Africa Community mission there. We have UN peacekeeping mission, bilateral deployment of Burundian forces. But also diplomatically, there have been several initiatives. Most important, the one already mentioned, the Rwanda process, which is this mediation between the DRC and Rwanda, as well as the Nairobi process, which is a process facilitated by the former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta and linked to the East Africa Community, which aims at a dialogue between the DRC and Congolese armed groups. So most efforts currently go through reviving these processes and trying to harmonize them. But this is complicated because the Nairobi process itself has stalled over the last years because of this regional tension that I mentioned, but also because of the DRC's response to this conflict, which was a mobilization of Congolese armed groups under a loose banner of what is called the Wazalendo, which is Swahili for patriots, which kind of undermines this whole demobilization process that Nairobi process seeks to support. And the Rwanda process has also stalled, as I mentioned before, over Kinshasa's refusal to engage with M23, but also Rwanda, who undermines key instruments of this process by not sending military experts, for example, to this ad hoc verification mechanism, which is part of this. But we have seen a lot of international diplomatic efforts now. We have seen 2 Security Council briefings, an African Union meeting, East Africa Community Summit today, with a SADC meeting tomorrow. So, and they all converge on the following.
We'll have to... we have to leave it there, Bram. Thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa, for your valued insights and analysis there.
We're calling the show Vantage. We hope you like what we put together for you. Touted as the minimum defense from that video. India's neighbours were the first to send the special edition of Vantage live from the White House throughout the week. Hindu Mandir in we're on our way to Tel Aviv. Pretty measure, but it's also the perfect way to drive.
I don't think that
Prime Minister of Bhutan, Sherin Thagbé. Welcome to
60% of the world's
office. Prime Minister Modi did the iron.
We were actually.
How are you doing? How do you like? It's been 1 year since that meeting. Iron bars separate you from the outside. Out the vote efforts. Trump had, it says, and at $4.3 trillion. 300 billion by 2030. That's what we need to tackle climate change.